Hi, my name is Christina Dunlap, and I'm going to talk to you about some research that I've done on content literacy. I'm going to start you out with an imagine if situation. So imagine that you are in 5th grade, sitting in science class. Your teacher tells you that because of the pep rally scheduled for this afternoon, she's not going to have enough time to teach the lesson on the classification system. Rather, she instructs you to take your book home tonight and read the lesson on your own. So if you're in this kind of situation, you're in 5th grade, you've never looked at the material before, are you going to be confident enough, or are you going to be one who has difficulty with reading to learn? Also, would you be able to decipher what is on those pages, or would it feel like it's an impossible mountain to climb? You'd be surprised at how many students will let you know that when they open up a informational text, they're confused by what's on the page, by the structures of it, and what goes with what. So why is this something that we should be concerned about? Well, our goal is to prepare students for college and career. This is something that's big in the Common Core and should be a concern to us no matter what. We want our students ready for what's ahead of them. In real-world situations, one needs to know how to read to get information. Our employers aren't asking us to just read fictional stories. They want us to be researchers. They want us to be able to look at informational text and analyze it and come up with what the information is saying. Nell K. Duke is one of the pioneers of researchers for content literacy, and she points out that students are receiving very little instruction with informational text. She also stated that our failure to develop adequate informational reading and writing skills in many students has long been recognized. Some scholars have even linked these failures to larger deficiencies in achievement. Another researcher in content literacy is Moss, and he states that teachers help students learn to read the world by providing them with literacy learning tools that will last a lifetime, and by developing the abilities that will allow students to not only survive, but also thrive in the technological age to come. So this topic is something that really does need to be addressed, especially with the Common Core state standards at our heels. Come 2014, all states are strongly encouraged to fully implement these standards so that everyone is on an equal playing ground. One of the main focuses is to expose students to more complex informational text. Literacy skills are embedded within the core subjects. So this is something that all teachers of content areas need to get used to. They need to be responsible for teaching literacy skills that are critical to their subjects. This is something that I'm going to emphasize a lot throughout this presentation. So each teacher needs to hold some responsibility to getting our students where we need them. What the research says. In doing my research on this topic, I found a definition for content literacy provided by Swafford and Callis. They state that content area literacy is a cognitive and social practice involving the ability and desire to read, comprehend, critique, and write about multiple forms of print. These multiple forms of print include textbooks, novels, magazines, internet materials, and other socio-technical sign systems that convey information, emotional content, and ideas to be considered from a critical stance. Content literacy is not content knowledge. Content literacy is not a prerequisite of content knowledge. However, one must have content knowledge in order to become advanced in content literacy. So students need that background knowledge before they can become advanced in with the literacy aspect. I have some shocking statistics concerning informational text in the classrooms. Fewer than 3% of 8th graders can analyze and extend information at a basic level. Why, do you ask? Well, most of it's because of a lack of experience with expository text. we're dealing with too many narrative texts in the classroom. If students aren't exposed to working with expository text, how can we expect them to analyze it? The recommended ratios of literary to informational text should be 50-50%, so half literary, half informational by the 4th grade. By 8th grade, it should be 45% literary and 55% informational. And by the 12th grade, 70% of the text that students are dealing with should be informational. And I have a quick little video clip to show you the same information.
The Common Core State Standards require elementary students to read a much greater volume of informational text than they are now. The standards require that students read and spend 50% of their time reading informational text and 50% time reading literature. This is going to be a welcome change for teachers and for students. When you think about the little ones, you know what sponges they are, how insatiable their desire is to learn all about the world and how it works. Elementary school teachers, though, have been faced with these expanded literacy blocks that have been dedicated mainly to stories and these expanded math blocks. And by the time you put those two together, it is all but locked out a study in social studies, and history, and geography, and science, and the arts, and all the wonderful subjects that both teachers want to teach and students want to learn. The research tells us that only 7% of instructional reading time in elementary school and actually through middle school is spent on informational text. Now compare that to what we know students are going to need to do when they graduate, which is spend about 80% of their time reading informational text. We also know that informational text structures are much tougher for students to get and understand. They're more variable than our narrative text structures. The standards then require a move from 7% of instructional reading time focused on informational text to 50%. And that is going to set elementary school teachers free to do what they've been wanting to do. I myself am an elementary school teacher, and that I know is going to be a welcome change.
So as you can see, this is a popular topic and it's being discussed everywhere. Research, on the other hand, though, shows that this is not necessarily happening, but I truly believe that with Common Core coming up, this is going to be a big change. One way that you can support this idea is to stock your classroom with a healthy variety of both types of texts. Keep those narrative novels that the students love to read, but also provide them with some informational reading. Have magazines or newspapers or non-fictional stories that they can dive into. The basal readers that we work with have their limitations. If you look at them, most of the stories in them are the narrative type. So pair them with outside material. You can still use the basals, but supplement with texts that are going to challenge our students. Informational text can ignite curiosities about the world and build vital reading and thinking skills. So students are curious about information in the world. They want to know things. They want to know true information. So give them that opportunity. One thing you need to do is boost student motivation. Their motivation stems from self-efficacy, and students make gains when given choices. They're naturally going to pick texts that interest them, so be sure to have a wide range. Students enjoy having the freedom to read what they want to, and they become more involved with it when it's their choice and not because they have to read it. And make sure you provide instruction on how to comprehend informational text, and this goes for all teachers. There's different strategies for reading different types of material. Say, for example, you're in social studies. Students need to know how to read like primary and secondary sources. In science class, they need to understand that the text is going to have different text structures. They may be reading something with a cause and effect structure, or they may be reading compare and contrast, or it may vary throughout the same chapter. So they need to have instruction on how to comprehend these types of texts. It's not just the reading teacher's job. Moss quoted Little Fair as noting that despite all the debate about the initial teaching and learning of reading, little attention seems to be paid on how children are to be assisted to become competent, independent readers of a variety of texts. We seem to assume that as children progress through the primary school and middle school, they transfer their ability to read narrative into competent reading of non-narrative, upon which much of their further education and capacity to deal with adult life will depend. So when students are getting those critical skills in the lower grades, and then they switch over to, say, middle school, we assume that they know how to take the non-narrative strategies and put them into, or take the narrative strategies and put them into the non-narrative. And this isn't true because, as I said, there's different styles of reading and comprehending information. So you might be wondering, what are some things that you can do? One thing you may do is provide effective instruction in each subject. For example, you could start a reading apprenticeship, and that's basically what it sounds like. Is you have a student who would be your apprentice or a group of students, and you're going to guide them and model and then give them the support that they need. So you sit down with them and you show them how you read, you show them the strategies, you talk out loud, and you show them what a strong reader does with that type of text. And then you are there for their support when they need you. A big component of Common Core, they stress a lot on vocabulary. There's different tiers, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, but vocabulary is very important. The different tiers, there's 3 tiers, and if you were to go to the Common Core website and look up the Appendix A, they have a list of the 3 tiers, and they have examples of how to identify different type of vocabulary in the reading that you're doing. So say you're looking at Tier 1 words. Tier 1 words are the words of everyday speech that are usually learned in the early grades, not necessarily learned at the same rate by all children. But these aren't words that you are necessarily going to focus your discussion on. It's like the sight words and the common vocabulary that we use when we speak normally. Tier 2 words, these are the ones that you're probably going to focus most of your attention on, and these Tier 2 words are what the standards refer to as general academic words, and these are far more likely to appear in written text than in speech. They appear in all sorts of texts: informational texts, technical texts, and literary texts. Tier 2 words often represent subtle or precise ways to say relatively simple things. For example, you might say saunter instead of walk. Because Tier 2 words are found across many types of text, they're highly generalizable. Tier 3 words are what the standards refer to as domain-specific words, and these are specific to a domain or a field of study. So say you're in science class and you're talking about volcanoes. Well, you're going to teach them vocabulary like lava and craters and cinders and crust. Those are all Tier 3 words because they're specific to that field or to that subject. Because of their specificity and close ties to content knowledge, Tier 3 words are far more common in informational texts than in literature. These are recognized as new hard words for most readers, and they're often defined by the author of a text, repeatedly used and otherwise heavily scaffolded. So these are the words that you're going to introduce before you're reading a story so that the students understand what it is when they come across that. There's some interesting activities that you can do as well with these types of things, such as going online and they'll give you an excerpt and you can try to locate the Tier 2 and Tier 3 words and see how knowledgeable you are on that. There's a very strong connection between vocabulary knowledge and comprehension, so Give your students as much vocabulary support as you can. Just reviewing the definition is not sufficient. Giving students a list of vocabulary words, telling them to go home, look them up in the glossary, and write the definitions down, that does them no good, because they don't necessarily understand what the word means just by being able to cite the definition. So we need to spend a lot more time. Knowledge about words has many dimensions. To know a word means knowing what it means, how it's related to other words, how to pronounce it, and how to use it in a sentence. Spencer points out that in content areas, new words and concepts are central to instruction, and thus students need to learn specific meanings to understand the terms when they hear and read them, to use them correctly in both oral and written communication, and to remember them over time. So the goal is to teach our students vocabulary that they're going to keep with them and use in their language and help them to sound brighter and have a wide variety of words to use when they're speaking, writing, or communicating with someone in any type of way. Another thing you can do in your classroom is work on comprehension strategies. Students always need help with these. They always need modeling. They always need examples of how they can understand stories better. One thing to do is implement Bloom's taxonomy to ensure higher order thinking. We want our students using critical thinking skills. We want them pushing themselves. They've developed a new tier of the words that they use for the critical order thinking, and they've implemented verbs, so it helps us to understand where our students are a lot easier. Use open-ended questions. Don't use just the multiple choice and matching questions, because a lot of times students can guess on that. When you use open-ended questions, it makes them have to analyze the information and put it into their own words, so you can truly see whether they understand it or not. Teach text structures. This is very important with informational text. Teach, cause and effect, problem and solution, compare and contrast, sequencing. Students need to be able to identify those, because in the long run it will help them to organize the text in their mind and understand it better. Teach story elements. Again, that's going to be with your narrative stories mainly. Help them to make connections from text to text. Use graphic organizers. I use these a lot in my room, and I find that my students understand a lot better when they use a graphic organizer, when they take the important pieces out of a paragraph or a whole story and organize it on paper in front of them in a more simplistic way. They're able to put it together better. You can do question-answer relationships, or QAR. You can use anticipation guides before you get into a chapter or a concept. Literature circles are great, using KWLs or even paired reading. Make sure you include writing activities. Writing is also included in the term literacy, so we need to have our students doing a lot of writing activities. This ensures that they're analyzing the text and putting it into their own words, so it makes them own it and have the ability to communicate with others on the topic. You can do things like having your students write letters, or keep a journal, or do a learning log, or an exit slip. Or you can even create a classroom blog site where maybe once a week it's a requirement that they get on your classroom blog and write about something that they learned, or ask questions, or just put their thoughts out. So after doing all my literature review, I did an action research where I was in my classroom with my students, and I worked on text structures. The point of it was for me to see if teaching text structures specific to informational text would help their comprehension. I did this during an RTI period, and I had 11 students. 6 of them were female and 5 were male. So to get this started, I gave them a non-fictional story, and they read it on their own, and then I gave them a pretest, and the results were pretty shocking to me. Now, keep in mind this is a co-taught classroom, so the students struggle already, but having read this on their own and working with it, most of them had a failing grade. One student had 40%, 3 had 50%, 1 had 60, or no, 5 had 60%, and only 2 had passing grades, a 70 and an 80. So after that, we spent some time with instruction on text structures, and what I did was basically just taught them about the different text structures. We worked with cause and effect, compare and contrast, and sequencing, and I walked them through different examples, and we learned how to decipher which structure was which, and then we used graphic organizers. So we did a Venn diagram for compare and contrast, we did flowcharts for cause and effect, and we did some listing with the sequencing. And after we did several together, the students had a chance to practice on their own. And it was interesting to see because they were really able to grasp the concept after we went over it. So in the end, I gave them back the same story that they began with, and they took the same test. And this time around, I only had 3 students to fail. One of them actually had a 90%, 4 of them had 80%, 3 had 70%. So I really did see a difference in their understanding with text structures, or with comprehension of the text once I taught them those text structures. So in any type of reading program, you need to have goals, or what it is you have in mind for your reading program. The ideal reading program, some of the things that should be implemented, the biggest thing is you need to start with a highly qualified teacher. We need to understand these standards, and I know we're all kind of on the same page, just learning these new standards, so professional development is a necessity. Make sure that you're using Bloom's taxonomy. It's easy to Google if you're unsure of it, but starting from the bottom tier going up, it goes remembering, and some of the verbs that you can use with that to see where your students are at, or to have them use the remembering skill, would be like recalling information, listing things, describing things. Next up is understanding. That's where your students are summarizing, paraphrasing, classifying. Then we go to applying. This is where your students are implementing and carrying out and executing. Once we get to analyzing, that's when we're using higher order thinking. This is where the students are maybe comparing 2 or more topics. They're deconstructing information. They're organizing and finding information. Next to the top is evaluating. This is where students are hypothesizing, they're critiquing, they're experimenting, they're judging. And then at the top of Bloom's taxonomy is creating. And this is where students are designing and constructing and producing and inventing things. And this is where you're really tapping into their higher thinking skills, and you'll see a lot of creativity come about. There's a man named Dufour, and he does a lot of professional development, and he tells us to consider these 4 questions. The first question is, what is it we want our students to learn? What are the knowledge, skills, and dispositions we expect each student to acquire as a result of each unit that we teach in language arts? The second question is, how will we know if our students are learning? What evidence will we gather and consider collectively to monitor the learning of each of our students? The third question, how will we respond when students don't learn? Do we have a process in place that ensures students are provided with additional time and support for learning in a timely, directive, and systematic way that does not deprive students of access to new direct instruction? And the last question is, how will we enrich and extend the learning for students who have demonstrated proficiency? So we always have to keep in mind the students that need help, as well as the students who already are there and need challenge. We don't want them just floating around and not moving to the next level. You need to differentiate instruction. When you do this, it creates the best learning experience for all of your students. It's going to reach all types of learners. We all know that our students don't all learn in the same way. Bobby learns differently from Judy, who learns differently from Jennifer, who learns differently from Samuel. They all learn differently. So when you differentiate, you're giving opportunity to each student, and you're going to reach a lot more of your students. It offers multiple pathways to learning, and it's going to keep your students engaged. So if they're learning in a way that is best for them, they're going to stay engaged, because if they don't understand the pathway that they're taking, they're not going to really stay involved. And it gives them responsibility for their own learning. So when you differentiate, you're really tapping into a lot of different ways for your students to learn, and you're going to see the most success. We need to teach literacy skills cross-curricular. I know I've mentioned this several times, but it's very important that all teachers are responsible for teaching literacy skills that are critical to their subject. Like I said earlier, students read differently when they're reading narrative, non-narrative, something in social studies, something in science, even in math. They have to know how to learn to read and pick apart the important words in a math problem. So each teacher is responsible. It's not just the reading teacher. We need to motivate our students. This is a big thing. In your ideal reading program, you want your students motivated. Some ways to do this are by offering choices. Students love having their own choice and having the responsibility to choose what they're going to read. Engage them in challenging tasks. This is going to lead them to new discoveries. When they're challenged, they're finding new ways to do things. Provide students with some control over their learning. This is always difficult for teachers to give up that control, because we know what we want our students to learn and we know the best way to get them there. But that's not our job. It's their job to, we give them the skills, and then it's their job to figure out how to get to the end product. They like having control over it, and you'll see that they really blossom when they have the control over their own learning process, where they're more as a coach. Allow them to work in collaboration. This is a skill they're going to need their whole life, no matter where they end up. They need to be able to work with others, to communicate with others, and to work as a team. Motivation is multidimensional, and the students fluctuate in their motivational profiles. So what motivates one may not necessarily motivate the other. So you need to try different strategies with different students, and maybe they're motivated by one thing this time and next time it's something different. So you just need to keep tapping into that motivation. Incorporate technology. The Common Core states that we need to employ technology thoughtfully to enhance their reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language use. When we use technology, this is going to require higher levels of thinking. Think back to Bloom's taxonomy. The highest level was creating. And when they're using technology to create whatever it is, whether it's a PowerPoint or a blog or a wiki or a Voki, whatever they're using those higher skills because they're creating their own product. Technology also employs the multiple intelligences. The last thing that you need to be sure to include in your reading program are the 5 pillars of literacy, which are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Phonemic awareness and phonics, those are going to be more with the elementary grades. Fluency can be worked on through all grades. Vocabulary is critical to all areas. We need to focus on vocabulary, and students always can use extra support with comprehension skills. You also need to include writing. Remember, we want our students to be able to write or communicate with others, so when they put it in their own words, they're really owning the information. So just remember that you need to integrate literacy strategies in all areas, not just reading class. That needs to go with them throughout the whole day. Challenge students to use critical thinking, and be sure to think of the bigger picture in life and help prepare your students, because that's really our goal as educators, is to prepare them for what lays ahead. We want them to be able to be independent and critical thinkers. So I thank you for listening,